Hi, I'm Dr. Chad Larson. Thanks for joining me in another episode of Keep It Real. So if you've been following the show, you know that in natural medicine, we're not big fans of sugar. Sugar is in very low quantities in nature, and so oftentimes when we overdo it on sugar, it's what leads to a lot of the chronic diseases that we're trying to prevent and treat today, like heart disease and diabetes and obesity, and certain types of cancer can oftentimes be linked back to excessive amounts of sugar. But there's a particular sugar that I wanted to talk a little bit about today, and that is fructose. So fructose is a lot different than glucose. So just take a step back for a second. Glucose is naturally produced by the body when we consume carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are things that are made from like grains, and also things like vegetables or complex carbohydrates, and also fruits have lots of carbohydrates in them. So carbohydrates is a very natural part of our normal diet. But when there's excessive amounts, particularly of refined grain-based carbohydrates, think of like refined breads and pastas and crackers, chips, cookies, pastries, anything made from refined processed flour, these turn into glucose very quickly and excessively. So that's glucose. Glucose is very usable by the human body. Nearly every cell in the body has insulin receptors, and insulin is what allows glucose to be utilized by almost all the cells in the body. So the body is very familiar and very well adapted to utilize glucose, but fructose is very, very different. Fructose is metabolized very differently from glucose. There's no insulin response that's needed for fructose absorption, but at the same time, there's almost no other cells in the body that are able to utilize fructose except the liver. So the liver is tasked with the job of metabolizing and breaking down fructose. And so if you think about it, what are our natural sources of fructose? We get fructose from fruit, which is kind of what's it's sort of naturally regarded as the main source of fruit. Fructose is fruit, but it's also in vegetables and other plants. So basically the plant world produces fructose, and then when we eat those plants and we absorb some of that glucose or some of that fructose. And so when fructose is consumed in small quantities, no big deal at all. Our liver is completely adapted to utilize this amount of fructose, and that's very normal and healthy. And in fact, the level of fructose that's found in fruit and vegetables is very low. It's maybe 2 to 5% of the total makeup of the fruit or vegetable. And obviously fruits have a little bit more fructose than vegetables do. But at that level, the body is very well adapted. In fact, most of the time we just really don't overeat fruit. So if we're eating naturally, if we're eating what nature provides, it's very difficult to overdo it on fructose. But like many things in the human food chain, when humans start messing with it and start synthesizing and concentrating and processing things like fructose, then that's where things can really, really go awry. And this is where the production of high fructose corn syrup comes in. High fructose corn syrup is found in things like sodas and candies, and it's a major sweetener. It's all over the whole food industry, and you could easily find it by looking at a label. It'll say high fructose corn syrup, or it'll say glucose fructose or something like that. And basically that's an extremely synthetic, I think a horrible product of human food manufacturing. And I think we'd all be a lot healthier if it was completely removed from the food system, but who knows if that's going to happen. So fructose is very well adapted, or the body's very well adapted to metabolize fructose, but at these excessive amounts, problems happen. And one of the problems is that since it's only metabolized in the liver, remember, very different from glucose, which could be metabolized and utilized all over the body, fructose is only metabolized in the liver, and because of that, if there's an excessive amount of fructose, then the liver gets bogged down because no other parts of the body are able to use the fructose, so it can really bog down the liver's ability to metabolize it. And this is why it can contribute to things like triglycerides going up. Remember, triglycerides are fats that are produced by the liver when there's an excessive amount of sugar. And since fructose doesn't get metabolized normally like glucose, it really has, it kind of tops off pretty easily in the liver, and then the rest of it is spillover that the liver has to convert into triglycerides so the body can deal with that. So if there's too much triglyceride floating around in the system that's produced by the liver from overconsumption of high fructose or excessive amounts of fructose, then these triglycerides have to be plugged away somewhere. They can't just keep floating around in the bloodstream. So they get plugged away in fat cells. That's where triglycerides go when they're in excessive amounts. So it contributes to obesity, and because of that, we know that high fructose and obesity contributes to heart disease, which contributes to type 2 diabetes, which can contribute to a whole list of other chronic illnesses. So high fructose can become a problem, and has become a problem very, very quickly. And because of its effect directly on the liver, there's another condition that's well known to be associated with excessive amounts of fructose, and that's NAFLD, which is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. Because there's so much overproduction of triglycerides from excessive amounts of fructose, these triglycerides get packed into the liver, and then this is what causes fatty liver disease. And so lots of people, it's a very common condition in our society, unfortunately. A lot of people have been diagnosed with this condition, and really you got to regard fructose at the very top of the list of things that you need to do to prevent and treat this condition that can come with its own set of issues. Another thing that we're learning is that everybody's had their cholesterol, taken for the most part, and oftentimes we look at cholesterol and LDL and HDL and triglycerides. Another thing that goes up with excessive amounts of fructose is LDL, but not just any old type of LDL. We've talked about in past episodes that there's different kinds of LDL. There's a kind of LDL which is frankly kind of healthy. It's kind of the big fluffy type of LDL that we call, and it's very usable by your cellular membranes. But there's another type of LDL which is called low density lipoprotein, or small dense low density lipoprotein, SDLDL. And these form of LDL are straight up bad guys. They're not helpful for your cell membrane, and they're the ones that are more associated with heart disease. So you can make the connection pretty easily that high fructose corn syrup or excessive amounts of fructose intake can disrupt your whole lipid profile, your cholesterol, LDL, HDL, triglycerides. And so, which of course, those are all risk factors for cardiovascular disease. So something important to consider there. But one other association that it has with obesity is with excessive amount of fructose, it causes leptin resistance, which we've talked about in past episodes. But just to quickly summarize, leptin is a hormone that tells your brain that you're full. And this leptin gets produced by your fat cells, and it goes up to your brain and says, okay, we're done eating. You don't need to keep eating anymore. But it causes leptin resistance. So leptin resistance causes overeating, because the brain is not getting the signal that you're full, so you continue on eating. And if you just look at dietary sources of fructose, at least let's say, in our culture with things like with sugar sweetened beverages, these are all high fructose corn syrup for the most part. And if they're not high fructose corn syrup, sometimes you'll find them with just straight sucrose, which is just your typical table sugar. Sucrose is 50% glucose and 50% fructose. So sucrose, half of sucrose is this fructose. The sucrose, the glucose component of sucrose is probably a little bit more usable by the body, like we talked about at the beginning, because glucose can be used in pretty much all the cells of our body. But fructose being 50% of sucrose, you can see that too much sucrose could also lead to a lot of these cardiovascular issues that we're talking about. And if you think of, the body only requires probably a teaspoon or two in the entire body to function optimally and normally. But if you take a typical 20-ounce can of soda, that has about 15 teaspoons of sugar in it, usually in the form of high fructose corn syrup or sucrose. And this excessive amount of sugar, the body just can't handle it. We're topped off at like a teaspoon or two, so the rest of it's going to be spillover that the liver and the rest of the body has to deal with, really putting a person at these risk factors for cardiovascular illness and diabetes and stroke risk and non-alcoholic fatty liver disease, etc. So I hope that kind of helps to break that down a little bit. If you think about, eating foods that are in their most natural form, that's a really good test with every meal that you consume. How close is this to its natural form? If you ask yourself that question, and you're going to find that your sources of fructose are very, very low, and they're just going to be pretty much in fruit, a little bit in vegetables, and it might be a little bit higher in things like certain types of syrup, like agave and honey. But even these are processed, and again, if you're trying to get it from a natural source, it's pretty difficult to go get enough honey that's going to throw off your balance of fructose metabolism. So again, always consider what nature is providing and try to consume it at those levels, because when we move beyond that, we really run into these risk factors for chronic disease. So I just wanted to give you that little primer on fructose. And again, it's not something that we need to be totally against fructose, but it's excessive amounts of fructose. So go ahead and enjoy your fruit, enjoy your berries, enjoy the other vegetables that have fructose in it, but they're at such a level that the body is very well adapted for metabolizing, but just be very wary of excessive amounts of fructose. So enjoy your fruits. I'll keep reading the studies and bringing you the information. Until then, keep it real.